Typically, within the hierarchy of Roman politics, ex-consuls enjoyed a level of eminence which made them revered fathers of the Senate. When legislation was put before the Senate by a consul, or a tribune of the plebs, the august ex-consuls were the first to be asked to debate the subject, their wisdom and experience valued above all others. An ex-consul who had reached a level of celebrity that outweighed that of his consular peers would have been honored as the opener of these debates. Such was the case of Marcus Aemilius Scaurus, who, during the era of Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, was deemed the princeps senatus, or house speaker. Such a distinction might also have belonged to Marcus Tullius Cicero, who had been named Father of the Republic for his role in preventing the near downfall of Rome, as a consequence of a civil war manufactured by Catilina and his conspirators. Unfortunately for Cicero, his years as an ex-consul brought him neither reverence nor eminence. Although he was hailed Father of the Republic and enjoyed the accompanying cheers and applause of the crowds, these failed to escort him down the path to becoming the Senate's princeps senatus of the era. But if Cicero basked in the adulation, making more of his consulship with each telling of events, was it not his right to seek a measure of how different was he from Pompeius, Lucullus, or Crassus, each battling within the Senate to be granted triumphs for the subjugation of Mithridates, or Spartacus, so that history would forever know the victor's name? But, to carve out their place in history, orators held no triumphs. Instead, they published their works, hoping they would stand the test of time. Following his successful defense of Sextus Roscius, who had been accused of patricide, and inadvertently exposing the corruption within the dictator Sulla's regime, Cicero published his Pro Roscio speeches for the public to read. After prosecuting Gaius Verres for the outright plundering of Sicily during his praetorship, Cicero published the two speeches, titled In Verum, which had caused Gaius Verres to flee the country, as well as another 3 speeches he'd written, but never had need of in court. The following year, after defending a client named Marcus Tullius, in a land dispute, Pro Tullio was publicly circulated, followed by Pro Fontio and Pro Cecina the year after that. Even Cicero's defense of Gaius Rabirius, whom Titus Labienus, at the urging of Caesar, had accused of murdering Lucius Appius Saturninus 27 years earlier, had produced reading for the masses in the form of Cicero's Pro Rabirio. By 63 BC, with Cicero's publishing of 4 volumes titled In Catilinum, Cicero had published no less than 13 of his winning court cases. Unlike vanity, seeking after accolades for traits such as beauty, that are more blessing than undertaking, Cicero sought recognition for the things he accomplished. As a new man, with no illustrious family ancestry, he was no less aware of his public image than was Pompeius Magnus, and even went to unnecessary lengths to ensure his public, as well as his senatorial colleagues, were well aware of his services to the Republic, even when they were deemed charity. However, the masses who adoringly build up their gods, also love nothing more than tearing them down, the moment a flaw appears. The change in public attitude toward Cicero began when Cicero uncovered the lie upon which Publius Clodius had built his alibi, following the desecration of the Bona Dea. By claiming to be out of town on the day a man, dressed as a woman, had gained access to the female-only cult, Publius Clodius had lied to the jury. But Cicero, with his feet firmly planted on a moral foundation, had revealed to the jury that just hours before the good goddess's festival was desecrated, Publius Clodius had paid him a visit. Despite being the subject of scandal among Rome's nobility, Publius Clodius's stunt at the festival of the Bona Dea made him a subject of admiration among the common people, who relished the idea that a patrician son of ancient lineage would cause such a stir within his own class. Publius Clodius soon became the people's anti-hero, a position he quickly used to launch himself higher up the political ladder. He first went after the man with whom Cicero had shared his consulships, Gaius Antonius Hybrida. Clodius arranged to have Hybrida charged with corruption in the province of Macedonia. Because Macedonia had been the province Cicero traded away, in exchange for Hybrida's consular complicity while in office, it was implied that the funds Hybrida had plundered from his province were being discreetly split with Cicero. Suddenly, the crowds who once cheered Cicero began mumbling under their breath. One cunning move after another, from managing adoption into a plebeian household, to being named tribune of the plebs, to legislating a laundry list of laws which guaranteed him the support of the populace, Clodius nudged the masses further and further from their love affair with Cicero. With the walls collapsing around him, and having nowhere to turn, Cicero suddenly received a summons from Caesar, the consul-elect at that time, extending an invitation to join a small group of senators comprising the largest constituencies in Rome, and sharing a clear agenda to gain control of the government. Cicero, within this quadumvirate, would bring the support of Rome's conservative faction. However, even though partnership in Caesar's new club, besides offering him wealth and power, would protect him from his enemy, Publius Clodius, Cicero, once again, chose honor over opportunity. He refused Caesar's offer. When, soon after, Cicero was exiled for having put Roman citizens to death without a trial, the people who had once loved and adored him said nothing. The Senate, having unanimously voted the death sentence for Catilina's conspirators, also remained silent. Cicero left for Thessalonica and, once out of Rome, lost his Palatine villa to Publius Clodius, along with his villas in the Italian countryside. However, barely a year passed before the people of Rome were openly calling for the return of Cicero. Between the gangs of Publius Clodius and those of Milo, Rome's streets were ruled by violence. Even Pompeius Magnus, Rome's greatest general, had been forced to hide within his home because of threats against his life from the gangs of Clodius. And so Pompeius, in league with Cicero's brother, Quintus, began a campaign to recall Cicero to the city. Finally, Rome understood what Cicero knew. Rome needed him. Choosing honor, even in the face of exile, had yielded up its just reward. He would return to Rome, and once again, save the city. Immediately upon his return, however, Cicero learned the price for having received Pompeius's help when he found himself pressured into legislating yet another special command for the great man. And when Cicero thought to help reconcile Pompeius to the conservative party, attacking the policies of Caesar in an effort to compel Pompeius to publicly criticize Caesar's policies, he only gave Pompeius Magnus the ammunition to cut a better deal with Caesar, by showing Caesar that Pompeius was the only person in a position to protect Caesar's interests in Rome. To add insult to injury, Pompeius then used Cicero's talent for legal defense as a guarantee of acquittal when allies of Pompeius were brought into court on allegations of bribery, corruption, or public violence. Cicero was forbidden to prosecute Aulus Gabinius for accepting a huge bribe from King Ptolemy to invade Egypt. Aulus Gabinius had been consul the year Publius Clodius legislated for the exile of Cicero. As consul, he had the power to fight the legislation, and lead a portion of the Senate to oppose it. Aulus Gabinius, however, did nothing, and allowed Cicero to be exiled for a decision made under the legal protections of the Senatus Consultum Ultimum. But, because Aulus Gabinius was Pompeius's ally, Cicero was not allowed to aid the prosecution. When Aulus Gabinius was next brought to trial, for having illegally vacated his province, in order to enter Egypt, Pompeius then forced Cicero to defend him. On behalf of Pompeius Magnus, Cicero also found himself defending Titus Annius Milo, charged with the murder of Publius Clodius. And when both Titus Annius Milo and Aulus Gabinius lost their cases, and were exiled, Cicero was blamed for the verdicts, accused of defending them without vigor. Yet again, Marcus Tullius Cicero found himself manipulated by Pompeius Magnus when the general, as consul for the 52 BC year, legislated the Lex Pompeia de Provincies, a modified version of the Senatus Consultum which had been written in 53 BC by then consuls, Calvinus and Rufus. Because it was now illegal for the 52 BC praetors to take up provinces for the 51 BC year, New propraetors and proconsuls were needed to fill the positions in those provinces whose governors were due to return to Rome. And with the stipulation that 5 years had to pass between the holding of their office and the assumption of their provincial duties, the pool of candidates was shallow. The new praetors were ineligible. Many older praetors and consuls were already serving provincial terms. Some had died, and others were simply too old, and no longer wished to travel abroad. If no candidates existed that met the appropriate 5-year requirement, then the Senate could reduce the required time to 4 years, and then to 3, until all necessary provincial governorships were assigned. Cicero was one of the few ex-consuls who had not held his office within the past 5 years, and so he was assigned the province of Cilicia, a former stronghold of the Mediterranean's pirate guilds. But, since Marcus Licinius Crassus had declared war against Parthia, the east was a hotbed of military activity. Though Crassus lost his life at the Battle of Carrhae, the war did not end, and the son of Parthia's king had engaged in continual assaults against Roman-occupied Syria. Cicero had spent his life proudly taking a moral stance, first against Clodius, and then against Caesar. Now, being shipped off to the war-torn east, Cicero, who was not a military man, very likely found reason to alter his personal views. Crassus, Pompeius, and Caesar, step by step, had carved out the Roman Empire, without Cicero's weapons of moral superiority. Cicero probably realized that moral power had proven no substitute for the actual power of legions, as his actions, striving to serve moral principles, were ultimately deterred by those who held legions, and could enforce such decisions. And so, before leaving for his province, Cicero requested Caesar release his brother from service in Gaul. Cicero needed Quintus, another military man, trained under Julius Caesar, to accompany him to the province of Cilicia.